At that time, I was a first lieutenant, U.S. Air Force, stationed at Malcolm Air Force Base, Montana. I was trained and assigned duties as a missile launch officer for the Minuteman I intercontinental ballistic missile. I was designated Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander and part of a two-man crew. My commander at that time was Lieutenant Frederick Mywell. He's now deceased. We were on duty inside the Oscar Launch Control Center, a concrete capsule located about 60 feet underground. We had operational control over 10 Minuteman nuclear missiles. Each missile operates independently and has its own source of primary and backup power systems. It is important for you to note that the command and control for these missiles was entirely located within the capsule. There was absolutely no means to affect any of the missile systems from outside the capsule. On the evening of March 24, 1967, while my commander was on a scheduled rest break, I received the first of two phone calls from my topside flight security controller, FSC. The first call was to report unidentified lighted objects flying above the facility. Minutes later, the FSC phoned again and reported in a very agitated state that there was a large oval-shaped object hovering above the front gate. It was a red, pulsating, lighted object, approximately 30 to 40 feet in diameter. The best he could describe it. It was difficult to distinguish a structural part of it on the inside, except that it was glowing red, pulsating object. He had all the men out there with their weapons drawn. He wanted me to tell him what to do next. I, of course, told him something like, make sure nothing comes inside the perimeter fence. As I started to inform my commander, our missiles began to shut down. We lost alert status on all 10 missiles while this object was above our facility. When we queried the fault system, all missiles reported guidance and control system failure. At that time, the FSC reported to me that the object had flown off at high speed. When the security alert team arrived at the affected LS, and I'll read LS meaning launch facilities, they reported seeing the object hovering over those sites. As they approached closer to the object, they lost all communications with the FSC. After speaking to the wing command post, Lieutenant Mywell informed me that the same thing happened at another flight. At that time, I assumed that meant that night, but it turns out what he meant was it happened at another flight about a week earlier. They reported that the objects were above them, and at that point the missiles started shutting down, disabled. Recently, let's say 2010, there was a shutdown of 50 missiles at Francis E. Warren Air Force Base. This was announced by the Air Force. It was announced that there was eventually announced there was a computer glitch. Now, I'm very worried about that. I'm not sure I believe that, but we do have witnesses that have come forward, both civilian and Air Force, that said they saw an object in the sky at the time of these shutdowns. This is still being investigated, but these incidents are still going on. These objects know in great detail how our missiles operate.
They know ours, but we don't know theirs.
That's right, and they can shut down our missiles at any time. They have proven that. They know in great detail how they operate, and so if you release that information to the public, what do you say then about what kind of defense do we have against these things?
The greatest thing that's happened is more people have come forward. You heard Bruce Fenstermacher and Mr. Schindel say that as a result of my appearing on public broadcasting programs, they decided to go ahead and come out. So, again, if there are others out there that want to come forward and feel they can, deal with this, because there is still a ridicule factor involved, it's going to help this, disclosure eventually.
And you had 30 30 years to reflect on the incidents of what occurred that day at the base. Do you believe that it's an extraterrestrial presence that was causing that?
Yes, definitely not of this earth because of the way it flew. I was an aircraft certification engineer for over 22 years. I worked for FAA. I was in Air Force. The way it flew and the way it was able to shut down the missiles in a very specific way by sending a very specific signal to each of the missiles.
And you've never seen anything like that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't even imagine that something like that we would have today if it was ours in some way. Otherwise, we wouldn't worry about other people having nuclear weapons. We could just shut them down anytime we wanted to.
Divers in the water. The water was very clear. You could see down as much as 200 feet in it. But what I saw down there were two UFOs parked side by side, but I couldn't see anyone around either one of them. Then a little later, someone moved, one of the UFO occupants, and I guess go ahead and call him what they are, the alien, moved over to the side and came into my line of sight. Very soon after that, he came out of the water going approximately 100 miles an hour. As soon as he broke the surface of the water, he increased his speed to approximately 2,500 miles an hour and quickly went out of sight. He was gone for about 15 or 20 minutes. He came right back, when it slowed down very much, went in the water again at about 100 miles an hour, went on down and he and the other one, you could see them working on the UFOs. They, after about approximately 2 hours of apparently performing maintenance on the UFOs, the two of them took off together again. We left the water at about 100 miles an hour, immediately accelerated to well over 2,500 miles an hour, went virtually straight up and disappeared.
First of all, I want to say to all of the people that have testified, you have done an incredible job. When I was asked to do this, I debated for a while, and it's a subject literally I know very little about, except what I read in the newspaper, most of it years ago. I was a skeptic when I came, and what I have found, and this has to do with the credibility of the people that have testified. I want you to know that I don't know what it is or how big it is, but I do believe that we have that there are spaceships, whether they're friendly or whether they're enemies. We have that they have been enough sightings of a human creature. I don't know what it looks like. And so I appreciate what you have, the sacrifices you've made and what you have done. And for those of you here testifying for family members, or this is the first time that you've talked in public about this issue, you are to be commended. I know it has to be a difficult thing, and it's easy for me because I just got to sit here and listen to all of you. And so I just appreciate all of you that have been here and what you have done. And it was a privilege to sit and listen to your testimony. So thank you very much.
So that's your closing remark?
Thank you, Representative Hooley. We'll now start with our witnesses, and I think we're allowing 10 minutes each. That's correct. If I could ask, okay.
By 1928 and 29, T. Townsend Brown as well as the Koloski-Frost experiment in physics in Germany, had determined that VHV, very high voltage systems, done in a certain resonant field could result in so-called electromagnetic gravitic effect, the lifter effect that has been described, which you see in UFOs. They also can create what's called a space-time bubble around an object so that you can correct for 1G. This is how these objects are traveling at multiples of what any aerodynamic physics would describe, and can make right-hand turns without killing the occupants. Around this same time, there was, in the 1940s and the late 1930s, a number of UFO sightings. This included the so-called Foo Fighters. Yes, it's a famous rock group. However, the Foo Fighters took their name from the reports of these objects seen in the theater of World War II that were flying around our aircraft. We thought it was a secret weapon of the Nazis. The Nazis thought it was a secret weapon of ours. There was Jimmy Doolittle, the famous general. His nephew is a dear friend of mine, and he has testified that General Doolittle was sent by FDR over to the European theater in World War II, investigated the Foo Fighters, and came back and told Roosevelt, and I quote, "They are interplanetary vehicles." So by then, there began a classified program, and which was augmented further by events, as mentioned, in 1941, and then, of course, the famous Roswell event. Those events led to, as Philip Corso describes, a reverse engineering program. As you all know from the famous Wilbur Smith document of 1951 from Canada, it talks about that flying saucers exist, but there's a high-level team headed up by Dr. Vannevar Bush that is studying the, quote, modus operandi of these vehicles. These were the most brilliant scientists, Edward Teller, Oppenheimer, and others, Hermann Oberth, amongst others, who were in this team studying how extraterrestrial vehicles move. In October of 1954, a key date I want the committee to remember, we have actionable intelligence from someone who has worked in the National Security Agency and has been in the vault. All of this went deep black because they figured out, at that point, gravity control. So since 1954, October of that year, we have not needed rockets, jets, internal combustion engines, and surface roadways between cities. I say this with authority that this is the case. Eventually, these breakthroughs in human discovery were complemented by the study of the extraterrestrial material that were retrieved from these events. And contrary to most people's thoughts, the Roswell event was actually a downing of an extraterrestrial vehicle by an electromagnetic system that was hidden in a radar dome that was switched on, and this is in an FBI document that I can provide for the committee and is on the flash drive given to the Congress. The result ultimately was that there were transdimensional physics that began to be studied that deal with the nexus between electromagnetism, energy generation, anti-gravity, and consciousness. And we have discovered that there is a nexus and that, in fact, there are electromagnetic systems that have been developed that can interface directly with what we call coherent thought, the same way that you can interface with a system with lasers, which is coherent light, where you sync up all the wavelengths. Ultimately, these breakthroughs were paralleled with amazing developments in the biological sciences and the experimentation with cloning. And this began many years earlier than was reported from Dolly the sheep in Scotland. This goes a little beyond, I think, what this committee wants to look into. However, you need to understand that the technologies that we have, and we were discussing, are not theoretical. We have actionable intelligence that any committee in Congress or executive action can find regarding current operations. And I just want to go through a list of them very quickly of these facilities and corporations for which we have witnesses who can be subpoenaed by the committees of the Congress. This was developed at the request of Congressman Christopher Cox of Orange County, with whom I met, and was later further developed for the briefing that we put together for President Obama. These facilities are the Edwards Air Force Base and subsections where at the dry lake bed where the Lockheed Skunk Works operations, Haystack Butte, China Lakes, George Air Force Base, and the closed Norton Air Force Base were an anti-gravity device, so-called alien reproduction vehicle, for which we have the schematics, was seen by Frank Carlucci and others on our witness team. Tabletop Mountain and Blackjack Control. The aerospace facilities there are the Northrop Anthill Facility, Tejon Ranch, the McDonnell Douglas Llano Plant, Lockheed Martin Hellendale Plant, and the Phillips Lab. At the Nellis Air Force Facility, so-called Area 51, no one calls it that. There's S4 and S12, Pahut Mesa, Groom Lake, and a number of sub-facilities. The most important facility is in Utah, near Provo, the Dugway Proving Grounds, all of which is underground, and the airspace above it is classified. There are no roads into this facility. The New Mexico facilities include Los Alamos National Labs with underground connectors to the so-called Dulce area where the biological work is being done, and Kirtland Air Force Base. And the complex there includes Sandia National Laboratories, Phillips Labs, Manzano Mountain Weapons Storage Facility, Coyote Canyon, and the White Sands Complex. In Arizona, near Fort Huachuca, which is Army Intelligence Headquarters, there is a UGB underground base where one of our witnesses, who will testify, worked on 9 separate extraterrestrial vehicles that had been down through advanced electromagnetic pulse weapons, and there are several different species of extraterrestrial biologicals stored at that facility. The other facilities, and this goes on, include a special compartmented area of Cheyenne Mountain, where we have witnesses in our team who can be subpoenaed, where we have tracked extraterrestrial vehicles in our solar system that were measuring 26 miles in diameter. There are also facilities in Australia, a key one being Pine Gap, the so-called Alice Springs facility, which is mostly a U.S. Air Force facility, even though it is in Australia. I recently talked to the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia about this. Also, the Redstone Arsenal and the Marshall Space Flight Center. We have a scientist at the Redstone Arsenal who works under contract for IT&T, who have developed these transdimensional systems. He was under contract with my project to bring these energy devices out, and he was then threatened by a former CIA director and what I call the goon squad that went down there 3 years ago in March. This is just part of the information we have, and this information is on the flash drive given to Stephen Bassett's staff, then you're all welcome to review. Thank you.
Thank you.